Greetings, I'm Marten, Rabarts, Director of New Zealand International Film Festival Whānau Mārama. Talking with Richard Riddiford, Director of Before Everest. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
It's a very personal film, it's a personal story, it's one you didn't even want to tell. One of the charms of the film, I think, is your digging in your heels resistance as a director, but then being a dutiful brother, following your sister's fascination with your father's personal history, and then the arc of the journey where you're drawn closer to a man that perhaps you've come to understand better. So it's a family film. It's like a family journey, but it's told on a very big stage because of the characters involved in the history of our country. As a child, I think there's just we know a lot about the journey from having seen the film itself, but as a child, were you aware of this connection to Everest, to Hillary, to the climbing history of the country? Was that something that was like in your face every day at the dinner table?
Well, it was in the sense that the table mats that we had that we dined on were all pictures
Literally,
of the Himalayas.
I'd forgotten that, yeah.
And the photographs were all about us. And certainly, there was that was a sort of a backdrop, but never discussed that much, I suppose, in our family, as these things aren't. But it was always sort of, we were aware of it, never paid much attention to it. But my father always was climbing, well, not climbing the mountains, but was always roving around the hills and the landscape, and we knew that that's what was in his blood, and he was forever kind of looking for an excuse to go off for a walk somewhere.
Anything
outdoors, and we ended up living on a farm that was in this wild landscape, which really suited his temperament of living in that type of environment. But as a child, you don't really pay much attention. That just is.
Can I just ask, it was mentioned that he was studying law. Did he become a lawyer in his later life, past student days, past climbing Himalaya days?
He became a lawyer, and he worked, I guess, 20 or 30 years as a lawyer. But then he ended up buying this huge farm, which again was sort of out of his whole love of the kind of landscape that he bought this farm on the edge of Wellington, and he really devoted most of his time to running that farm later in life. So, yeah, that's where we were.
In the film, I already mentioned that you had this resistance to following the story, but fortunately, you listened to your sister and you were gaining footage. You were doing these interviews and it was going onto some sort of shelf in your editing room to figure out what to do with it later. When you came to completing the film, as you revisited those earlier interviews, those earlier journeys from Nelson to Christchurch, trying to capture the stories of some of your father's climbing colleagues. Were there any surprises, things that you found there that you hadn't noticed at the time you first shot it?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing is, from the beginning, I was aware that, as a documentary maker, this was a great story, obviously, when the man on the far
under your nose.
Yes, I knew that. So, and that kind of got me interested, but at the same time, I had not been close to my father and did not like him for many good reasons, at least I thought so. And I didn't want to be a hypocrite. I was determined I wasn't going to sort of make a sort of hagiography of my father, having spent my youth really pissed off by him, And so, I mean, there was a lot of personal stuff that I had to work through, but on the other hand, I would go, oh my God, I know this is such a good story because, it is. And that kind of kept me coming back and going. And then at a certain point I realised this was starting to get really interesting as a journey, kind of thing that brought our family together and galvanised our family in a way that if we just left all those photographs in the cupboard, you know, it's just none of that would have happened. So I was at a certain point extremely grateful that this has occurred, and our family was, because it gave us this kind of focus as a family to kind of celebrate our father in a way that we never had. But looking back at it, I mean, you look back and you think, in horror, don't you, sometimes, at your kind of slightly, your lack of kind of certainty, or you know, I look back and think, thank God I carried on, I suppose. I didn't stop, because I did actually try to stop on several occasions, and Anna and I, my sister, had some fairly, you know, it got quite tense and difficult between us.
Well, she's clearly a strong character. Some of the descriptions of your father as being someone with like real will and determination, who got to the top of that mountain in the Indian Himalayas. You can feel that coming through from your sister. You could feel that sort of that drive coming from her, and your reticence is so charming on the other side of it. It's like, really, must we?
Well, the interesting thing, of course, is that is the thing. You know, you can't help your genes, and we've all got that extraordinary persistence, way past the point at which you stop listening, and that's a bit. What I notice about myself, you know, there's nothing incoming at a certain point with the Riddiford.
Pushing forward.
You're just pushing forward, and Anna's got that, and I've got it, and all of my sisters have got it, and it makes for quite a bit of conflict, because Anna and I were determined that we were going to do what we thought was best. And the irony, of course, it's, you know, a bit of a trap from my father, isn't it? That we were.
That was very ironic. It's like, see,
yeah.
There's something also. I think you could feel your drive as a maker really starts to also come to the fore when you feel the resistance. You feel there are stories not being told, and you know, apart from some of the older climbers, there's like some of the earlier footage. You knew there was stuff that was being unsaid, and you could feel your frustration and curiosity.
I mean, you know, you have this kind of underlying imperative that you must be entirely truthful, and you must know these things, and you must tell these things. And the climbers didn't really want to go there into some of the stuff. And, you know, to me, I felt that we must get those stories, otherwise what we were doing. And at a certain point, though, we got to the point where it didn't really matter in the end to tell those stories. I guess the transition for me was actually looking back at it. You know, at the beginning I felt extraordinarily important that we actually got to the bottom of all this. But then I think in one of the interviews, my sister said, actually, this is all a reflection, not on my father, but it's on Hilary. You know, it's not, you know, what he said is really not so much to do with us, it's to do with him. And that kind of was quite a point to realise, actually, we didn't need to carry all this baggage. It was more to do with Hilary than it was to do with my father, and that kind of allowed us just to...
Sort of the baggage had been dumped on your doorstep, but
we
don't need to, yes.
Yeah. Anna kind of realised we didn't need to worry about it, because it was actually more of a reflection on Hilary's, whatever was going around in his head, than really anything to do with my father, and that kind of allowed us just to sort of really enjoy that, start to really enjoy what we were doing, and kind of then we decided we can go to Mukapabat and take our children, and that was...
Which was a really wonderful conclusion for the sort of last act of the storytelling. And at the same time, it also feels like you were able to see your father's and your family's, you know, position in something that is a national story. It is a story of you know, national significance, international significance, and find a peace with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, we
take ownership of it.
We never, I think when you say you look back at, I never realised actually that if my father hadn't organised that trip in 1951, Hilary would not have got to Everest. It was very unlikely he would have climbed Everest, because it came about that was the matter of timing, with the British reconnaissance trip in 1951 just happened to be at that same moment, which was the kind of...
The serendipity of that, and the success of your father's climb.
Yeah.
That's such a wonderful turning point for our understanding of the times, which of course most people wouldn't have anything like that detailed knowledge, which you've shared with us in your film. Thank you.
Yeah, and that really allowed, and Hillary rightfully, off he went and climbed the mountain. And I never was trying to suggest that my father was the man to climb the mountain.
And that's very clear.
But he certainly was the one who had the strength of will and the planning ability and the wherewithal to get them out of the country in the middle of New Zealand's biggest, waterfront strike ever. And
another
Hillary
historical
was
moment.
saying, let's cancel. And my father was just, no, we're going to do this. We're going to. And that's what it took, I think, back then, that determination to actually get there. And my father, that was his part to play.
Well, I'm super pleased that you had that determination of will to stick with it, and that your sister Anna dragged you by the hand sometimes. But both of you, she's very much a presence in the film. So thank you for both of you for sharing your family's story, and one that we all somehow share and have a connection to in this country at least. So I know the film is going to be really, really well received out there. So thanks for talking about it, and I'm sure the festival will be enjoying it as we speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.